And welcome back, rugby fans, to Rugby411. As always, I'm your host. My name is Joshua Shibata, and we have officially reached the halfway point of the 2023 Major League Rugby season. It goes by so fast, especially when you have such exciting and just immensely amazing games of rugby. This season has been full of a lot of action, few blowouts, especially recently. But it was a very historical blowout, and we'll go into a little bit more details of that game in just a moment. But half of the season's in the books. It's very interesting to see where the power rankings are now that we've reached the halfway point. We are, now in the second phase of the season where I'm going to be making a mention of this with a lot of the teams. We are getting to the point where teams are pretty beaten up. A lot of players are on the injury list now or playing more of a backup role, and it really comes to a point where teams are going to have to dig deep, and it becomes, like with most games of rugby, a battle of attrition. Which team, not necessarily the most talented team, but which team can field the most competent team of players, a full 15, technically a full 23 when you have the 8 off the bench, and who can go through the rest of the season from now until the playoffs in as much of one piece as possible. So, we are going to be going over our power rankings again. It really depends. Our power rankings are determined by what happens on the pitch, not necessarily by the record, though usually as you start to see, the records kind of do coincide with who's in the top four comparatively to who's in the bottom, middle, and who's in the bottom. But again, it's not all about just record. It's about what you do on the pitch and what you're doing now. In particular, there's a team that was starting to gain some momentum, but now is slowly sliding their way down the rankings. Also, again, playing in the factors of who you're losing to, who you're beating, home pitch advantage, all that good stuff. It all counters into my power rankings, and again, it's a lot of fun to just talk and debate about. So, without further ado, let's go into the Week 9 power rankings. The bottom of the rankings, not a lot of changes. Middle, there's quite a bit because it's just the way games played out. So let's just go down with our bottom team. Unfortunately, especially after this performance, which again is historical in some aspects, our team from the north, the Toronto Arrows, unfortunately are still at the bottom, the number 12 spot, especially after the performance this week, which really kind of upsets me because I picked them to favor as the win because they really performed well against the reigning and defending Major League Rugby champions, the New York Ironworkers, last week in Toronto. This week again in Toronto, I was thinking that they could do better. Unfortunately, they did a lot worse, losing in a complete blowout, 80-5 against the New England Free Jacks. I'll go into a little bit more detail on the historic value of that game when I talk about New England. But, with a performance like that, man, Toronto is literally the bottom team of the rankings. Second worst team of the rankings, I hate to call that, but they are everyone's second favorite team, the Dallas Jackals, who unfortunately suffered a heartbreaker with a loss against Houston. It was a very competitive game, 21-33. Again, it was a heartbreaker of a game. Dallas, as they have been doing most of the season, showing a lot of talent. Kudos to Sam Galla, who was the 2021 number 1 overall draft pick for the Dallas Jackals, scored his first try of his Major League Rugby career in this game. Unfortunately, that just wasn't enough. Dallas did pull out a lead in the game in the second half, but unfortunately there was a yellow card on Dallas that Houston then capitalized on, and they never looked back. And unfortunately for Dallas, Houston walks away with the win, and Dallas remains at the number 11 spot. Another team that's been facing a lot of hard luck, the new kids on the block, the Chicago Hounds, staying at number 10, suffering a loss to the number 1 team overall, San Diego Legion, 24-48 in San Diego. at Dragonfire Stadium. Again, Chicago has been facing a lot of bad luck. They have a very, very talented team. I'm shocked at how much they've been struggling. Only one win. They at least had their first franchise win in their first season, but they are struggling to try to find that second win in the season and going even further. The commentator, if you watch the game, kind of pulled up a very interesting fact. The 60th minute of the game, there's 80 minutes in a rugby game, but the 60th minute, the 1 hour mark, is usually where the Chicago Hounds start to falter. Most of their games, they've been at least leading or within 3, I believe was the stat, but then by the 60-minute mark, they start to lose that advantage, and it was no different in this game. It was very competitive at first with San Diego. And again, Chicago was leading in the second half, but man, all of a sudden San Diego started pulling ahead, and in the end, Chicago just did not have enough, and they ended up losing 24-48. Again, a really, it's even the commentators weren't really sure what it is that's causing Chicago to have a lot of issues. Again, if you look on paper, very talented squad. Billy Meeks. You have a lot of the Austin Gilgronis team. You have a lot of talented players, even though Julian Dominguez is no longer playing because he's dealing with injuries. But you have DeWall. You just got all these talented players for the Chicago team, and yet for whatever reason, it's just not coming together. And again, whether it's because they're a newer team, a lot less cohesion. There's also a lot of mishandling issues, a lot of errors on the Chicago team. The defense is really sleeping a lot with the Chicago team. Don't know why, but a lot of the tries that are scored by their opponents seem pretty much literally like walk-in tries. A lot of miscommunication amongst the defensive side of Chicago, where it always looks like a Chicago player is assuming one of the other Chicago players is going to make the tackle, and it just doesn't happen. So don't know what it's going to take to get Chicago to kind of bring it back together. But Chicago is now really struggling and going into the second half of the season near the bottom of not only my power rankings, but also near the bottom of the very competitive Western Conference. Moving in at number 9, the team that I was mentioned earlier was on a hot streak. Now has slowly slid itself down into the bottom third of the Major League rankings, the NOLA Gold. This is they suffer their loss to Rugby Atlanta 7-23. It is the second loss in a row after going on a 3-match win streak with some very impressive wins. All of a sudden, NOLA is starting to look very, very flat. Not a lot for me to really talk about in the game. I'll be honest, wasn't a very exciting game. But Rugby ATL basically handled NOLA pretty decisively. And again, NOLA started this week at number 5, slipped all the way down with that performance down to number 9. Also because of all the other teams that were winning that moved above them. So it just goes to show you, with my power rankings, doesn't matter what you do in the beginning of the season, it's what you're doing currently, and right now NOLA is sliding in the wrong direction. Also sliding down one spot, another team that surprisingly is struggling quite a bit this season is your reigning and defending Major League Rugby champions, the Rugby New York Ironworkers, sliding one spot to number 8. And that's because they're lost to the number 7 team, Old Glory DC, and these two teams pretty much switch places. The Old Glory DC defeating New York 42-31. It was a very, very exciting game. There's, as I mentioned before, a bunch of injuries on New York side and Old Glory side, but New York specifically, Jack Hyten, their very talented fly half, is hurt. Ed Vidot, last year top try scorer, is hurt. So a lot of injuries. Interestingly enough, for the Old Glory side, Tito Diaz Bonilla, the very talented fly half, who is one of the top point scorers, was on the bench for whatever reason, but he has been struggling with some serious issues as well. So a lot of injuries on both sides, a lot of moves that I feel are strategic to try to just give a lot of starters some rest. We'll go over one of the other teams that's doing that right now as well. And it was a very exciting game between New York and Old Glory. A big shout out to Lautaro Bovaro for the Old Glory side, who had his breakout moment in this game, scored 2 tries, very, very strong tries by Lautaro Bovaro. New York made it very, very close in the end, but in the end, Old Glory was able to pull away another try by Willie Talatiniamu, and then, of course, as I mentioned before, Joaquin Diaz Bonilla coming off of the bench to seal the win with a big penalty kick. This was a big win for Old Glory, the first one out of 5 attempts against Rugby New York. It's been a very lopsided rivalry between the two teams. This is the very first time that Old Glory has beaten New York. So big win for Old Glory, moving up 1 spot from number 8 to number 7. New York sliding down a spot from 7 to 8. Going up to number 6, the team that I mentioned before that made history, the New England Free Jacks, slaughtering the Toronto Arrows 80-5. Going over a couple of the historical things of this game. First of all, 8 tries in the very first half. They already had their bonus point within the first 25 minutes of the game. I mean, it wasn't really even a game. It was almost more like a practice game for New England Free Jacks. 12 tries total for the New England Free Jacks. The most tries scored in one game by any team. It is a record. And the 75-point deficit over Toronto Arrows is also a record now for Major League Rugby. So congratulations to the New England Free Jacks for making history. Unfortunately for New England, I mean, it was against a team that is literally on the bottom of the power rankings, so unfortunately, they do not move from their spot. And I know that might be controversial with some New England fans, but I just feel, again, slaughtering a team is one thing, but slaughtering a really bad team, I don't think that's nearly as impressive a win as if they were to do that with a top team or even more of an Old Glory or New York team. So, unfortunately for New England, they stay at number 6. Moving up a couple of spots because they did beat a rather impressive team is Rugby ATL, going from number 8 to number 5 after beating NOLA Gold. Again, this kind of bugs me because I thought NOLA was the hot team on the hot streak. Now they got back-to-back losses. Rugby ATL slowly climbing themselves up through the power rankings, knocking on the door of the top 4. Now, your top 4, there's a little bit of movement here. Number 4 is the Houston SaberCats, who are starting to look like a very, very impressive team in the very competitive Western Conference. They did defeat Dallas 33-21. Again, it was a very close game. A lot of great action. Dallas did make it very competitive, but Houston in the end pulled it off. David Coutier, of course, the very talented fly half for Houston, contributing with some very impressive footy skills. If you saw his try, one of the tries of the week, it was almost a beautiful mix of soccer skills, kicking the ball to himself, and ducking at the last second to make the try. Beautiful, beautiful try for David Coutier, who's also one of the top point scorers in the league. Now the big change from the game of the week between the Seattle Seahawks and the Utah Warriors. Utah pulling off the victory 41-35 against what once was the most dominant team in the league. These two teams now switch spots. So Seattle Seawolves sliding down to number 3 and Utah Warriors moving their way up to number 2. Very impressed with Utah. For a while, Utah was looking like what they were last season, a very, very inconsistent team, but they are starting to put themselves into the spotlight. Very, very impressive win over Seattle. There was a little bit of back and forth action between Utah and Seattle, but in the end, Utah was the one that came out on top. Again, very, very competitive game. Could have went either way, but Utah was the last team standing, so they move into the number 2 spot. And then, of course, your number 1 team, still number 1, San Diego Legion, now with the best record in Major League Rugby, coincidentally also now the number 1 team in my power rankings. defeating Chicago Hounds 48-24. San Diego rested a lot of their starting players, which again seemed to be more strategic than anything else, giving their starting players a lot of rest time. Nate Osberger, big shout out to him. Easily the player of the week, if not just the player of the match. He contributed a lot to this game. He assisted a couple of tries, scored technically 3 tries. 2 of his tries are called back because of penalties, but Nate Osberger definitely was the star of the match. Really, really impressive game by him. Very, very impressive game by San Diego, and now they are the team with the best record with only 1 loss in all of the 2023 season. So, that is the power rankings for this week. Again, Western Conference looking like the elite conference right now in the league. You have a very, very hot and competitive top 4. It's going to be very interesting to see as we now go towards the second half of the season into the playoffs, because only 3 of these teams can make it into the playoffs. Which of these three teams will end up advancing? Which one of them is going to miss out? And then, of course, you have more of your top teams of the Eastern Conference. I have to admit, Rugby ATL kind of coming up is very impressive. New York sliding down, that is kind of concerning, and I really am trying to root for Old Glory DC to pull off some very impressive victories like they did with New York and New England. Let's see what they do after their dominant performance over Toronto. And, now we have our bottom rack. I'm trying to, hopefully, I still believe Dallas can win their second game of the season. We'll see. And then we'll see if Chicago can find the second win of their franchise as well. Now, as always, we'll now go into our pick'em results for this week. Again, I struggled quite a bit, but there was an interesting winner this week. Let's pull it up. Bam! And congratulations, James A6117. First time I believe you ever got the yellow cap. Congratulations, brother. He has the most points of the week, 7 points. Then we have 3 people tied for second. Jahigo, BT Woodrow, congratulations. That's a new name popping up on the list. And Mr. Rugby, they're all 1 point behind with 6. And then let's introduce a new player to our league, Juvie EGW, welcome. And SD Calguy, USA League and Union Rugby fan, John Hawkins and Harry all had 5 points, coming in tied for 5th. Unfortunately, our wooden spoon of the week goes to Tex. Sorry about that, Tex, coming in last at 2.5. Let's now look and see what the overall rankings look like. Bam! And still, Matt, MSDRFC 83, hold on, but very slim lead, as you see. 59.83. He is a little bit over 2 points ahead of second place SD Calguy, 57.33. Jahigo, 53.99. USA League and Union Rugby fan drops a spot to 4th, 53.83. And then Harry drops a spot to 53.66. If you look, though, those last 3, 4, and 5, they are literally separated by tenths of points. So, and again, like I said, SD Calguy is only 2 points behind from Matt. So literally it is still anybody's game as we go into the second half of the season. Unfortunately, Brandon B-Dog 20 is still, Brandon B-Dog 82 is still at the bottom with just 20 points. So, again, as always, I appreciate everybody that's participating in my Super Brew Pick'em League. Don't forget, winner gets a MLR t-shirt of their favorite team of their choice. I'm still hoping to pull it out, but man, I am struggling. Even my desperate picks aren't really helping me this season, so it has been kind of frustrating. But that's it for my video for this week. Let me know what you think about my picks. What you think about my power rankings. Let me know if you agree or disagree, especially New England fans. I know there's going to be a lot of them that are arguing why they shouldn't be higher after slaughtering a team, setting a Major League Rugby record. But slaughtering a team like the Toronto Arrow is not nearly as impressive as one would think. But again, let me know what you think about my power rankings. And as always, I appreciate your support. I appreciate you watching my video. And I'll see you on the pitch.